everybody, welcome to today's story time. We're reading the book A Locket of Love and we are on chapter 4, so we're going back to see Nana. The tale becoming more than just a story. Molly was awoken the next day by her dad roaring at her mum as they argued downstairs. Their piercing shouts travelled up the stairs and filled Molly's room with an intense cold feeling. She felt her body absorb the anger like poison as she pulled the duvet up over her head to blank out her mum retaliating by shouting back. "Please make them stop shouting, please make them stop shouting," Molly repeated over and over again to herself. Molly suddenly felt a whoosh of cold air over her. She threw back her duvet and went over to the window, drawing back the curtains. "That's weird. The window isn't even open," she said. Her gaze shifted to take in the beautiful autumn day outside. She opened the window and stuck her head outside. As she breathed in the crisp, fresh air, she no longer felt trapped. She felt she could breathe again. Molly took in another deep breath of air, feeling her body relax even more, letting out all the anger that had been floating around the room, which had then been absorbed by her. Molly closed her eyes and leant her head against the window frame. She didn't want to go downstairs. She didn't want to see her parents in all their rage. Molly's eyes shot open. "Nana-o!" she said passionately. Molly began to hear footsteps coming up the stairs. She darted across to her bed and dived in, pulling the duvet up around her neck. As she closed her eyes, pretending to be asleep, her bedroom door creaked open. "Molly, are you awake?" her mum's voice said. There was a slam of the front door as her dad stormed out the house. Molly began to move under the duvet, trying to look like she had just woken up. As Molly opened her eyes and stretched her arms above her head, her mum moved across and sat down on the edge of her bed. "How are you feeling today, love?" her mum inquired, stroking Molly's hair. "Any better?" she asked. Molly rolled over towards her mum, scrunching up into a ball and slowly shook her head. Molly's mum placed her hand on Molly's forehead. "You haven't got a temperature," she said as she continued to inspect Molly. "It's my stomach. I must have eaten something yesterday at lunch," Molly said as she rubbed her stomach. Molly's mum looked out of the window. "It's just that I can't leave you here on your own and I need to go and see your Nana today." Molly pulled herself into a sitting position and wrapped her duvet tightly around herself. "That's okay, Mum. I can just come with you and lie on Nana-o's sofa whilst you do your jobs," Molly said, looking straight into her mum's eyes. "I'm going to Nana-o's, I'm going to Nana-o's," Molly whirled the words around in her head. As they sat in silence, as her mum contemplated what to do, they heard a knock at the door. Molly's mum got up from the bed without saying a word and made her way down the stairs to the front door. Molly listened intently as she heard a familiar voice. It was Layla's voice. "Is Molly ready?" she heard Layla ask. "I'm afraid she isn't coming to school today. She seems to have picked up a stomach bug. She thinks from something she ate yesterday," Molly's mum replied, looking behind her up the stairs. "Oh, okay, no problem. I'll call round after school to see how she is doing," Layla said whilst trying to keep a straight face. "I think it's best if you wait until tomorrow and let her rest," Molly's mum said sympathetically. "But I need to," Layla began, knowing she couldn't wait until tomorrow to hear the rest of the story. "Tomorrow, Layla," Molly's mum said a bit firmer. Layla shuffled on the spot. "Can you tell her I said hi?" Layla said uncomfortably. "Will do," Molly's mum replied as she began to slowly close the door. Molly heard the front door close shut and raised her hands to the sky in celebration. "Yes!" Molly quickly wrapped the duvet around herself and continued the act of feeling ill as she heard her mum returning up the stairs. Molly's mum poked her head round the door. "Okay, you'll have to come with me and lie on Nana-o's sofa and I'll try and be as quick as I can," Molly's mum said as before disappearing into her own room to get ready. Molly shuffled from side to side, jiggling her bum in excitement. She rolled off the bed, found her jumper and put it on over her PJs. She then put on her socks. She grabbed the blanket that was lying at the end of the bed. As she looked at it, remembering that it was the blanket her Nana had given her as a baby, Molly stopped and sat down at the bottom of her bed. As she let the blanket slip through her fingers, she saw that all the different colours, the patterns seemed so much brighter. She realised that she had never really looked at the blanket before, and for a long time she even hated it. But now it felt safe, it felt warm. As Molly swung it over her shoulders and wrapped it around her body, it felt like home. She sat there on the end of her bed, smiling to herself. Who would have known? Her mum entered her bedroom, interrupting Molly's thoughts. Ready? Molly's mum said, motioning to head downstairs. I'm ready, Molly said as she raised herself up from the bed with the blanket draped down her back. She walked past her mum with pride. Her mum watched Molly walk by and frowned as Molly looked far from ill right now. Molly made her way down the stairs to the front door, where she slipped on her shoes and stood staring at the door. Molly's mum whirled past her, grabbed her handbag off the bottom step, lifted the keys off the hook and opened the front door. Molly stood staring for a moment at the open door. Same door, different me, she thought as she took her first step outside. Molly made her way to the back of the car, waiting for the door to be unlocked. As Molly's mum finished locking the front door, Molly watched as the car lights flashed as her mum unlocked the car. Molly opened up the back door of the car and slid onto the seat, closing the door behind, enjoying getting out of the angry atmosphere that still lingered in the house. She watched her mum walk across towards the car, open the driver's door and get in. As her mum slid the key into the ignition, she looked at Molly through the rearview mirror. Good job you are actually ill, because I could get in a whole lot of trouble if you were just missing school, Molly's mum said coldly, her eyes carrying out their interrogation. Absolutely. I'm definitely not feeling myself, Molly said, staring back at her mum with the same intent. Her mum concluded as she started the car and reversed back off the driveway. Not a word was said as the buildings began to fade and were replaced with rolling hills and trees. Molly began to enjoy seeing the grass and hedgerows instead of pavements and fences. What were you and Dad arguing about this morning? Molly asked, not taking her eyes off the view out of the window. Oh, nothing for you to worry about, Molly's mum said as her grip became tighter around the steering wheel. Molly's mum reached across and turned on the radio. She turned it up a little louder in an effort to drown out the noise of her thoughts and stop any more questions. Molly looked across at her mum's reflection in the rearview mirror and saw the lines of pain across her face. Molly looked away, readjusted herself in the seat and pulled the blanket that still lay across her shoulders around her body more tightly. She went back to looking out the window in the distance. Molly saw the single tree that always signalled that they were close to Nana O's. The car flung from one side of the road to the other as her mum took the corners with speed, knowing every single bend and turn with clarity. Molly reached across, taking hold of the car door handle to stop herself being flung around the back of the car again. I'm sure this happened last time, Molly said, remembering the last time they came to Nana O's. What did you say? Molly mum grunted, keeping her eyes glued to the road. Nothing, just talking to myself, Molly said distantly. There was no response from her mum. Nana O's cottage came into sight. Molly let out a sigh of relief as the car took another sharp corner, throwing Molly into the door. The car sped up and then came to a screeching halt. Molly looked across at the cottage, and there stood in the doorway was Nana O. Molly's mum turned off the ignition, got out of the car and slammed the door. Why does Mum get so angry when she comes here? Molly said aloud to herself in the car. She watched as her mum stomped her way up the garden path and began speaking to Nana O. Nana O started to nod her head and then stepped to one side, allowing Molly's mum to pass her by into the house. Nana O turned back to looking at the car. Are you coming in or letting me grow old on this doorstep? Nana O chimed. Molly quickly unbuckled her belt and opened the door, sliding down, her feet hitting the ground with a thump as she closed the car door behind her. She made her way up to where Nana O was standing. I hear you're sick, Nana O said, raising her eyebrows. Yes, I think I ate something funny yesterday, Molly responded, placing her hand on her stomach. Really? Or you're just not digesting your experiences very well. If you hold on to something that isn't good for you, then you will become sick, Nanaro said, placing her hands in front of her. Molly stopped and looked up at Nanaro with confusion. What do you mean? Molly said. I'll go and make us a pot of tea as your mum has instructed me that you are to lay on the sofa and sleep, Nanaro said as her eyes twinkled with mischief. Molly followed Nanaro into the house. As Nanaro turned into the kitchen, Molly went in the opposite direction into the living room, where the fire was already lit and blazing out heat. Molly looked around the room and saw the furniture had been rearranged. The sofa had been moved and was now opposite the chair Nana-O sat in. How did she know? Molly said to herself as she made her way across the room to sit down on the sofa on the side closest to the fire. Molly readjusted her blanket and a few cushions as she got herself comfy. Nana-O appeared in the living room door, holding a tray with a teapot, 2 cups and a plate of biscuits. She slowly shuffled her way across the living room, taking great care not to spill any tea, and placed the tray down on the small table beside her chair. She lifted the teapot and began to pour. Molly watched, but instead of the usual brown liquid coming out, it was a green colour with bits in it. I thought we were having tea, Molly asked, wrinkling her nose at the sight before her. We are, Nanaro said, handing Molly one of the cups. Molly looked down at the contents inside the cup. You said you had eaten something funny, and this will help to settle your stomach, Nanaro said with a cheeky smile. Why do I get the feeling that this is payback for lying, Molly said, sniffing the green-coloured water. Ah, life will always keep the balance, and it would do you well to remember that what you give out you will receive, Nanaro said, slowly lowering herself into the seat and ending with a thud as her bum hit the chair. Nanaro lifted her cup. Molly noticed that hers was normal tea. Nana-O took a sip and watched Molly's face of disapproval. I'm not the one with the poorly stomach, remember, Nana-O said as she chuckled. Molly lifted the cup to her lips and took a sip, her face screwed up in disgust. Lovely, she replied sarcastically, placing the cup down on the table beside her. Nana-O leant back in the chair in satisfaction. Not many people like the taste of lies. Nana-O began to lean forward to get a better look at the blanket wrapped around Molly. And there's me thinking you got rid of that, Nana-O said, admiring the beauty of the intricate design on the blanket. Molly glanced down, pulling the blanket further around her. No, I saw it at the end of my bed and had a strange feeling that I should bring it with me. So I did, Molly said, not taking her eyes off the blanket. How interesting, Nana-O said, placing her hands on her lap. And do you often get these feelings, and most of all, do you follow them? Nana-O asked. It's funny you should say that. Something really strange happened at school yesterday. I had a daydream that something would happen, and then it did, Molly said, thinking back to yesterday. I was kind of hoping you would be able to explain to me what is happening, Molly said, looking intently at Nana-O. How perfect, is all Nana-O said, as she fell silent and gazed into the fire. Molly listened as she heard the birds outside chirping. Very well, Nana-O said, breaking the silence. Shall we continue with our story? She asked as she threw another log onto the fire and returned to leaning back in her chair. Will you answer my question? Molly asked. I think you will find the answer in the story. It's not always a case of learning something new. It's about remembering something you have forgotten was true, Nana-O said with a smile. Where were we up to? Nana-O said, tapping her fingers on the chair arm. Ah, yes! He was sitting at the kitchen table humming his tune. Love is the answer, wishes come true as you remember the place that connects me and you, Nana-O said quietly to herself. Nana-O let out a sigh as Molly watched her eyes become brighter, her face looked less wrinkled, and the room seemed to come to life. That evening, as he made his way to bed, he saw his reflection in the mirror, and instead of the disappointment he usually felt towards the person staring back at him, he felt love. He shook his head at the bizarre feeling that came from deep within and got undressed, slipped under the duvet and was promptly joined by his wife. She reached across and turned off her bedside light, and the room descended into darkness. Moments later, Jacob heard his wife snoring in the background. He stared up at the ceiling in the dark as his mind continued to chatter about all that had happened that day. He then paused as a thought passed through his mind. What would I wish for if it were to come true? What is it that I truly want? His mind suddenly went blank. He had been so busy noticing how things had been going wrong that he had never given a second thought to what he actually wanted instead. They say the day is a gift, he whispered to himself. Well, the gift I will receive tomorrow is to be happy at work. His mind began to drift to how much he hated work and how much he hated his boss, and his old conversations began once more. As he lay there, he found himself starting to hum, interrupting the chatter by the little song he had created that evening. Love is the answer, wishes come true as you remember the place that connects me and you. He paused for a moment. So love makes wishes come true. No, that can't be right, he thought. I love so many people, and that hasn't made my life any better. He rolled over and picked up his phone, trying to distract himself from his thoughts. As he scrolled through the latest news, a headline in big bold letters appeared. They found the place where all is loved unconditionally. But as he clicked on the headline to read the article, an error message appeared. How weird, he said in confusion. His wife grumbled in the background as he quickly turned off his phone. What place? There is no place on this planet where that is true, he thought as he rubbed his forehead. He rolled onto his side and closed his eyes. As his eyes shut, he saw the locket in his imagination. I'd best return that, he mumbled as his mind fell silent and he finally went to sleep. Molly had curled up in a ball on the sofa, staring intently at Nanaro. I know that place you're talking about. I went there in my dreams, Molly said. Now, don't you go getting ahead of the story, Nanaro said, with such joy as she watched Molly begin to remember one of life's truths. Nanaro continued. Jacob was woken up in the usual way as the children whirled into the bedroom, jumped on the bed and climbed under the duvet. He rolled over to be greeted with a wide grin from his daughter. Morning, she cheered, with his son heads popping up from behind. Morning, you lovely monsters, he replied as he started the day with the intention he had set the night before. The house transformed into organised chaos as they all got ready for work and school. Jacob managed to escape as the children were busy eating their breakfast and his wife was putting the packed lunches in their school bags. As he made his way round the room, giving each one a kiss, wishing them a lovely day, he reached the back door where he was greeted by their dog. The dog proceeded to bounce around the room with excitement, acting like it was the first time he had seen him in ages. The man reached for his jacket, slipped it on, and slid his hand into the pocket where his fingers touched the locket. This caused him to smile as his body felt the same warm feeling he got last night. He took the dog's lead off the hook and placed it in one of his pockets. As he reached for the door handle, he saw his own reflection in the glass. I may not love you yet, but at least we're now heading in the right direction, he said to himself as he opened the door, stepping out into the fresh spring air. As he made his way down to the side of the house, through the gate, out to his car with his dog in tow, he started to hum again, with his footsteps beating out the rhythm. As he reached his car, the dog whipped round to the boot where he sat in eager anticipation. The man followed him round, opened it up, and the dog leapt inside. If only I could be more like you, happy and full of energy in life, he said as he ruffled the dog's fur. He then closed the car boot, made his way round to the driver's side and got in. As the car came to life, he let out a sigh and sat staring at the house. He began to chuckle to himself as the absurdity of the last 24 hours. Ever since he began to connect the dots. Since I found the locket, he said to himself, reaching into his pocket and pulling the locket out. He stared at it dangling in front of him. He shook his head in disbelief. That's only make-believe. Fairy tale stuff. It doesn't actually come true, he mused to himself. Just then the locket caught the sunlight and appeared to shine brightly. Or does it? He questioned. And he was interrupted from his thoughts as he heard the front door slam and saw his wife and children begin to make their way to the car. He quickly slipped the locket back into his pocket and put the car into reverse. As he backed off the driveway and set off down the road, he turned the radio on and attempted to drown out his thoughts and all the questions he had whirling around in his head. Jacob continued driving to work. Looking out of the window, he pulled up at the first set of traffic lights. He started to slow down. He watched as they turned from amber to green. He began to drive forward again. As he took the next turning to the right, he made his way down the road, approaching the next set of traffic lights, which again changed from red to amber to green. As he approached them, he stared confused at the traffic lights as he passed them. It must be just a coincidence, he said to himself. He continued down the road to the next set of traffic lights, and the same happened again. "What is going on?" he exclaimed, looking in his rearview mirror at the dog. "This never happens, ever." As he continued to make his way to work, every set of traffic lights did the same. He pulled into the car park and found his usual spot. He turned off the ignition and sat in silence. He turned in his seat to look back at his dog. "Did you do that?" he asked. The dog just tilted his head to the side in response. He turned back in his seat and continued to stare out of the car window. That wasn't just coincidence. 8 traffic lights, all on green. "That was amazing," he yelled, raising his hands up above his head in celebration. He opened the door, hopped out of the car and made his way round to let the dog out of the boot. As he closed the boot door, he looked around the car park. "This is the same car park," he thought, "but I feel different. How is it that yesterday I dreaded this car park, but today I love it?" Jacob looked down at his dog sitting in front of him. "Strange. This is all very strange." And with that, he began to make his way into the reception. As he opened the door, his dog ran to the lady sitting behind the reception desk. She knelt down, giving him scratches, and pulled out a dog treat from her pocket. "I really love how you do that," Jacob said as he watched them. The lady's head shot up in surprise. "Oh, thank you," she stuttered. He smiled and continued to make his way through the reception to the back to his office. Jacob's dog slowly moved away from the lady as he was hoping for another treat, but then he bounded into the office where Jacob was just hanging up his coat. Jacob made his way round to his desk where he started up his computer and the dog laid on his bed by the window. As Jacob was reaching for the papers from yesterday, there was a knock at his door. "Come in," he called. The door swung open and there stood his boss. Jacob felt all the life drain out of his body as his boss moved towards him and towered over him. He began to reel off all that needed to be done that day, all that he hadn't done, and most of all the mistakes he had made. Jacob sat in silence and felt his body temperature rise as his blood began to boil with rage and anger. He continued to sit motionless, receiving the wrath of his boss. There was a call from down the hall, and Jacob's boss paused to listen. Without another word, the boss spun on his heels and was out the door. Jacob gingerly got up from behind his desk, feeling lifeless, and made his way to the door, slowly closing it. As the door clicked close, he looked at his dog. "Why is it that when I'm just beginning to get things right, the vampire appears and sucks all life out and happiness from me?" Jacob made his way back to the desk and flopped in his chair, continuing to stare at the door. "There is nothing to like about him," he said through gritted teeth. The dog barked in response and made his way to his coat, nudging it with his nose. Jacob looked with scepticism. "Love is the answer, wishes come true, as you remember the place that connects me and you," he repeated to himself, thinking about the locket. "If there was only a way I could find one thing to like about him, that I could wish him away," he said. He suddenly began to laugh as he pictured his boss as a strange cartoon vampire going round everyone, sucking out the happiness. His laugh grew louder and louder until tears streamed down his cheeks. There was another knock at the door. He started to motion for the person to enter, as he wasn't able to speak between his fits of laughter. After a few moments, he began to compose himself. "Come in," he said, and his boss was standing in the doorway. Jacob couldn't help himself as he started to roar with laughter again at the sight of him. The boss stood there confused and then became annoyed. "Well, whatever you're finding funny, you are needed in the conference room. I have called a meeting." The boss took another look at the man sitting laughing in front of him, whilst nodding his head in acknowledgement. The boss did his usual spin on his heel and stormed down the corridor. The laughter began to fade as Jacob tried not to bring the picture back into his imagination of his boss as a vampire. He looked at the open door and then down at the desk as he thought, "I feel great. He didn't bother me this time." He rose up out of his seat and made his way out the door, letting out a chuckle here and there as he went. As he reached the conference room, he was greeted by all the staff, some sitting and the rest standing around the edge of the room. Jacob made his way in, squeezing past a few of his colleagues and then standing next to the receptionist. "Why are we all in here?" he asked. "Well, rumour has it that the boss has got a transfer and is moving." Jacob froze. "When did this happen?" he asked, in astonishment. "The call came through this morning," she said in her hushed voice. "This morning," he repeated to himself. The boss appeared at the entrance to the conference room and everyone parted like the Red Sea as he made his way to the front of the room. He coughed and cleared his throat as silence descended in the room. "Some of you may know why you're here." A few heads turned to look at each other in the room, trying to decipher who did and didn't know. "And that I have had my transfer accepted. The reason I'm moving is not because of the reasons you may all think, but for personal matters. Your new boss will be here tomorrow." With that, the boss marched out of the conference room back to his office. The room erupted into noise as questions bounced around the room. "Who is the new boss? Are they nice? Anyone is nicer than him?" It continued. Jacob just stood frozen to the spot, not believing what he had just heard. Without saying anything, he made his way out of the conference room back to his office, to be greeted by his dog waggling his tail eagerly. Jacob knelt down. "You'll never believe what's just happened. He's only gone and left," Jacob said as he began to dance around the room with his dog. He danced his way over to his desk and flopped on the chair, looking out of the open door, watching everyone come and go, speaking in whispers. As they bounced around ideas, what ifs and what to comes, he paid little attention to the pile of papers that sat dormant on his desk. He cupped his head with his hands as his mind began to wander. "The locket has done something to me," he thought, bewildered. He pulled open the desk drawer and took out a notebook. He took hold of the pen that was already on his desk and began to write. "Love is the answer, wishes come true, as you remember the place that connects me and you." He looked blankly at the words before him. "How can 17 words change my whole life around?" he thought, putting the pen down. He looked across and pulled his computer keypad and mouse closer to him. As he moved the mouse, the computer came alive. He clicked on the internet and proceeded to write in the search box, "Love is the answer, wishes come true, as you remember the place that connects me and you." After clicking search, the computer began to display pages and pages of answers. As he read through the different titles, he clicked on the third suggestion in the list. As the page appeared with a background of stars, he began to read. "Amongst all the legends, the one least understood is the universal law of oneness," he murmured as he read aloud to himself. "To know oneself is to know everything. We are not separate as some might believe. We may have our own way about ourselves, but our essence is all one of the same. To truly know life and thus know yourself, you seek and connect with that essence inside. And as you do, you will remember your ability to be able to create it into anything you like. However, this can only be done from a place of love, as only then is life's flow restored as you have enough energy to create worlds." He sat back in his seat, staring at the computer screen. And then he went across to his jacket where the locket lay in his pocket. "Can't be that simple. I found the locket, which helped me to remember to love, and whoosh, My wishes start to come true, he mused. His gaze shifted to looking at the open door, remembering what had just happened with his boss. Well, all right then. I wish for a new sports car, silver with a soft top. And what I love about the car, I already have it, that it is always reliable and good in all weathers. The man then sat and waited some more. Nothing. See, I knew it was a load of rubbish, he mumbled to himself and picked up one of his pieces of paper off the pile from his desk. He clicked open a document on his computer and began to type. As the noise of his fingers clicking on the keyboard filled the room, he heard the voice of a little boy running around the corridor, making pretend racing car noises. He looked up to see the little boy running into his office, chasing around in circles with something in his hand. The boy then became distracted when he spotted the dog, dropped the object in his hand, ran over to where the dog was lying and began to scratch his belly. Then he heard his mum call from down the corridor and sprung up, stumbling as he ran out of the room. The man blinked in disbelief, and then something caught his eye. He pushed his chair away from his desk and walked towards where the object was. As he knelt down and picked it up, "Seriously?" he said aloud, and there in his hand was a toy silver soft-top sports car. He looked at his dog. "I think someone is having a laugh with me," he said, making his way back round to his desk. He placed the car in front of his computer screen. He sat at his desk for the rest of the afternoon, typing away on his computer and working his way through his job list. Every now and then he looked at the silver sports car and toy and chuckled to himself. As he filed the last piece of paper away and closed down his computer, he picked up the toy car and held it in his hands. "I guess it doesn't really matter if every wish I make comes true, because it sure has been one of the best days ever just thinking about it, and not being so frustrated and angry," Jacob said to himself. He put the car back down on the desk on top of the notepad where he had written, "Love is the answer, wishes come true, as you remember the place that connects me and you." He then made his way over to where his coat was hung and slipped it on, as his dog watched eagerly and then sprung into action, sprinting across to the doorway. Yes, it's time to take you for a walk," Jacob said, sauntering over to where the dog was waiting. They walked out into the corridor and he reached for the door and closed it behind him. He walked down the corridor and began to whistle to himself. Into the reception area he went, where his dog bounced over to the reception lady, who was already waiting for him with a treat in her hand. The dog devoured the treat. "See you tomorrow," Jacob said, nodding his head behind the desk. "Come on you, time to head to the fields," he said, pushing the entrance door open so the dog could scoot through the small gap. Jacob walked across the car park and the car lights flashed as he unlocked it. He reached to open up the boot and the dog jumped in and laid down. The man lowered the boot door, closing it with a click. He walked around to the driver's side and got in. He put the key in the ignition and the car started up straight away. "I sure do love this car," he said to himself, beginning to laugh at the quirk of fate. He reversed out of the space and began to head to the place where they walked each evening. This time he had a little less luck with the traffic lights as he watched them change from green to red. "That's fine with me. I'm in no rush," he said, staring out the window screen. He drove in a daydream as his mind meandered through the day, and he mused about how much he'd changed in such a short space of time. It hadn't been hard. If anything, it could be said that it had been quite enjoyable. He said aloud as he thought about it. He began to slow the car down as he reached the turning in the road to head into the car park. He pulled into his usual spot and turned the ignition off. The dog shuffled in the boot with excitement, recognising where they were. Jacob watched him in the rearview mirror. "Come on then, I bet you're busting for a wee." Jacob opened his door whilst climbing out of the car. His body felt so relaxed as he pushed the car door closed and walked round to the boot of the car. Just as the boot was opening, the dog leapt out and disappeared off into the undergrowth. "I guess you were desperate," Jacob said, closing the boot shut and following in the direction his dog had gone. As he walked along the path, enjoying another spring evening, Looking at the trees beginning to bud, he slipped his hand into his jacket pocket. He felt the locket between his fingers, which caused him to smile to himself. He took his hand out and let it flop by his side as he continued on his walk. He watched his dog bounce around, darting from one side of the path to the other, sniffling all the different smells. Jacob began to make his way down the hill back to the car park, remembering the day before where he had fell in the mud and how unhappy he had been. "Well, I'm definitely not that person today," he said delightedly as he stepped over the puddle. He continued down the path until he reached the gate at the bottom, which opened out onto the car park. His dog was already waiting. Jacob walked through the gate into the car park and reached into his pocket where the locket had been. He felt nothing. He looked down as he opened up his pocket wider and peered in. It was empty. He then shuffled around the spot where he was stood to see if it had fallen out of his pocket. Still nothing. He turned to look up at the hill he had just come down. "Well, I guess I've learnt my lesson. I hope it helps someone else like it's helped me." He opened the gate and made his way back to the car. Nanero let out a large sigh. "Oh, come on, Nanero. There must be more to the story," Molly pleaded. "Oh, there are plenty of stories and plenty of lessons, but that'll do for today. Remember, you're meant to be ill," Nanero said cheekily. Molly wiggled back amongst the cushions she had gathered around herself. "I guess, but I have a feeling that you have questions," Nanero said, intertwining her fingers on her lap. I wonder what questions Molly's got. See you tomorrow for Chapter 5, Words and Wishes.